that was going around that the Windows it's a legitimate update, but it's crashing Windows 10. Okay, Zogt the Heilige Gemara. We learned the Mishnah already on Lamed Hamad Beis, but since the subject matter of the Gemara will be the Mishnah, it's worth our while to learn it once again. So let's see the Heilige Mishnah. Voloi Eitel Parai. The Kohen Gadol came to his par. His ox was standing between the Ulam and the Mizbeach. So we know the Mizbeach was just to the east of the Ulam. There was about, I think, 11 amas in between them, and that's where he stood. And that's where the animal was. Roy Shailadar, if the head of the animal was facing the south, so its hindquarters was facing the north. So it was in the north-south direction. Ufan of Lamar, but the head of the cow was facing the west, which means the cow turned his head sharply to the right. The kohen is standing to the east of this animal. That means between the animal and the mizbeach. Upon of the kohen is also facing west, facing the heichal. And he put his two hands on top of the cow, the bull, and he said, this is what he said. Ana Hashem, and it's not really the word Hashem. He said that the Shem Hashem, either the Shem Havaya, 4 letters, or 12 letters, or 42 letters, and it came out of his mouth, and he didn't really mouth the words, and nobody, even though people heard it, it was a nice that they forgot how to pronounce it. Avisi Pashati Chatasi, which is an unusual order that the Gemara is going to discuss. Lefanecha, and Yuvesi. Ana Hashem, and again, this is Shem Hashem. Kaper na lavoinois v'lapshoyim v'lachatayim. Shavisi v'shapashati v'shachatasi lefanecha. Ani Yuvesi. Kakosa v'saris Moshe Avdecha ki v'yem ezeh yechaper aleichem l'fnei Hashem b'chol chapeseichem l'fnei Hashem titaru. When they heard him say Shem Hashem each time, they said Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus. Let's see the head of the bar. Man Shamis Lei, who is the Tana that holds the Amar Ben Ulam Mizbeach is considered tzafai. Now we know that Kodesh Kodeshim, Karbanos that are Kodesh Kodeshim, have to be shechted on the north side of the Mizbeach. So the Mizbeach is 32 amas by 32 amas. So the real tzafan of the Mizbeach would be, there'd be a 32 amma strip that would run directly from the north wall of the Mizbeach up to the north wall of the Azara. And that strip area would be considered north of the Mizbeach. But our Mishnah is saying that that's not where the Kohen was standing. The Kohen was standing around the side of the Mizbeach to the west of the Mizbeach, which would have been south of the north wall of the Mizbeach, because you have that square, and he was around the side. Now, is that considered tzafai? Because it's only mutter to shecht a carbon there if that is considered tzafai, because we know that all kachim animals have to be shechted with tzafai. So Zok Gemara Abelezer Bar Shimon would have to go according to Shita of Abelezer Bar Shimon, who holds that that side of the Mizbeach is also the zone that's acceptable to Shech Karbanis. The Tanya we learned, Eizehu Tzafai. So before I continue on here, I just want to visualize the layout of the Azara. So you had your Heichal. To the east of it, you had your Mizbeach. Then to the east of that, you had the open Azara, 11 amas that the Kohanim worked in, 11 amas that Yisrael was allowed to, and then there was the gates to the Azara. So right off the bat, the 32 amma strip that ran from the north wall of the Mizbeach up to the top of the Azara, that's without a doubt the tzafan side of the Mizbeach. There's 2 additional zones. The zone to the left, which is between the Mizbeach and the Heichal, that strip of land. And then there's the area to the right, the strip of land, the 11 and 11, to the east of the Mizbeach, the north half of the Azara. And the Gemara here is discussing how many zones are included in the area that you're allowed to shech the carbon. So for sure, the 32 amma width is for sure counting. Moish, do you have your WhatsApp on? because Eddie Klein. Oh, you answered already. Thank you. You're one step ahead of me.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so Dr. Gemara weiter. So Ezeu Tzafon. What is the Tzafon, which is the zone that you're allowed to shecht a kodesh animal? It's Mikir Shal Mizbeach Tzafoni, from the northern wall of the Mizbeach, Yad Koisel Azara, up until the north wall of the Azara. Ucheneged Kol Mizbeach, the entire 32 amma strip, 32 wide, all the way from the top of the Mizbeach to the top of the Azara. Kulei Tzafon. That's all Tzafon, Divrei Rabbi Yosy Bar Yehuda. Rabbi Eliezer Bar Shimon adds another zone. Now, according to Rabbi Yosy Bar Yehuda, where they were doing this vidui with the par was out of the zone. But Rabbi Yosy Bar Yehuda adds another zone. He's Moisef Af Beina Ulam Mizbeach. He also adds, again, on the north side of the Azara, between the Ulam and the Mizbeach, from the north half of the Azara north, would also be considered in the zone, which would now allow our Mishnah to make sense, because that area is where the animal was kept. Rabbi Moisef, Rabbi even is more liberal, and he even says, Af Makam Drisas Ragli Akayanim, Yaf Makam Drisas Ragli Yisrael, which is to the right of the Mizbeach, which is to the east of the Mizbeach, from there, from the Mizbeach, up until the wall of the Ezra Yisrael, the north half. That's also included. So which area is not acceptable according to anybody? The Chalifos are the front of the Ulam. The building is wider than the rest of the Beis HaMikdash. So that area, the Beis HaMikdash, if you look at it from an aerial view, it almost looks like a T, like a letter T. So that area, which was the front of the Heichal, front of the Ulam, that area where the T is, from there and back, from there and back, everybody agrees that even though you're on the north side of the Zara, but if you're beside the Beis HaMikdash building, that would for sure not be good to shecht Kodesh Kodeshim, even though it's in the north half. So now let's analyze our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said that where did the smicha occur? It occurred between the Mizbeach and the Ulam. So Leimer Rabbi Eliezer Bar Shimoni, it's most logical to suggest that our Mishnah is following the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer Bar Shimon, who allows that extra strip to the east of the Mizbeach to be considered tzafon that you're allowed to shecht an animal wear. V'loy Rebbe, but let's say not Rebbe, because Rebbe adds the other side, which is a little bit strange, because the Gemara is going to say in a minute, Rebbe is not saying you cannot shecht where Rabbi Eliezer Bar Shimon. He's just adding even more space on the east side. So Zok Gemara, Afilu Tamer Rebbe. V'Rebbe hashtag Rabbi Yosy Bar Yehuda Moisef ad Rabbi Eliezer Bar Shimon loy Moisef. Are you telling me that Rebbe only is arguing with Rabbi Yosy Bar Yehuda to only add the east part of the Mizbeach, but he would not include the west side of the Mizbeach? That doesn't make sense. The west side of the Mizbeach is closer to the Heichel. Therefore, sure, it should be allowed. He's saying Ad Kedei Kach that you can even stretch it further away from the Mizbeach, further away from the Heichel towards the east. So surely, according to Rebbe, you're also allowed to shecht between the Ulam and the Mizbeach. And if that's the case, we can argue that our Mishnah is following according to Rebbe as well. This is what we mean to say why we suggest that the Mishnah is not consistent with Rebbe. Because Rebbe, if it's going according to Rebbe, why do you have to do the smicha between the Ulam and the Mizbeach? Nukme b'chula Azara. Anywhere in the Azara on the north side would be a place where you could do the smicha and the shchita. If you're going to say that, then Rabbi Eliezer Bar Shimon doesn't make sense either. Elamai Rabbi Eliezer Bar Shimoni, then v'nukme bein Mizbeach l'koisa. According to Rabbi Eliezer Bar Shimon, you can ask the same question. Why do you shecht it between the Ulam and the Mizbeach? Shecht it parallel to the Mizbeach, north of the Mizbeach. Elamayis lach l'meimer. What are you going to have to explain? Why is it that they picked precisely that spot between the Ulam and the Mizbeach to shecht the par of the Kohen Gadol? It's mishum choshen the Kohen Gadol. Since the Kohen Gadol is weak and tired and hungry, and he has to run all around the Azara, it'll take the wind out of him. So therefore, we want to keep his travels as short as possible. What is he doing after he's shechting this animal? He's taking its blood and he's spritzing it into Kodesh Kodashim. So if that's the case, Let him shecht it as close to the entrance of the ulam as possible. And that's why it's there. So the Rebbe Nami, just because technically he could have shechted it anywhere in the Azara, but the reason why the Mishnah says shechted bedavka between the ulam and the mizbeach is mishum chol shel kohen gadol. So which means that our Mishnah Lamaskana can be either according to Rebbe or according to Rebbe Elazar B'Shimon. The only Tana that's not consistent with our Mishnah is going to be Rabbi Yosy Bar Yehuda, who limits the shechita of the animal to right above the mizbeach in that strip, but not to the side. That's what we say over here. That might change tonight. But so far, our Gemara is saying that our Mishnah is either according to Rebbe or Rebbe Elazar B'Shimon, but not Rabbi Yosy Bar Yehuda, who would not allow you to shech the animal bein ha'ulam l'mizbeach. Okay, now let's look at the position of this animal. It said it's facing south, but west. How is that possible? They turned the head of this bull. I'm not sure how they held this bull in position. It's like 1,000-pound animal. But I guess there was some way they did it. Frankly, Gemara, if you want the head of the animal to face the west, so why turn the animal north-south and twist its neck, which is not a natural position? But just set up the animal to go from east to west. Its hindquarters could face the mizbeach, its head will face the ulam, and then you'd have to bend the head. Omar Abaye, we don't want the back side of the animal facing the mizbeach. You know why? It happens sometimes that the animal lets go of a package, and we don't want that package to be delivered in front of the mizbeach, and therefore we make it go north-south. And Rashi explains that what they did is the animal was north-south, but its hindquarters was actually north of the mizbeach. Because if the hindquarters was still in between the ulam and the mizbeach, the orientation doesn't matter. It's still going to unload its Amazon package right in front of the mizbeach. But by positioning the animal further to the north, where its hindquarters was north of the wall of the mizbeach, even if the animal delivers a package, it's not going to be right up against the mizbeach. Now, the Mefarshim tell us that there was a nace that it never happened that an animal left an Amazon package in the Zara, but nevertheless we're makbid to do everything with derech hateva as much as possible. Tanu Rabbanan, Ketzad. When I say Amazon package, it's very real because there are certain people. It's known that there's a lot of Amazon thieves. They stake out homes, they get Amazon packages, and they steal them. So there was a guy in Brooklyn who had a very good idea. He also had a problem getting rid of his garbage. He took a whole bunch of Amazon boxes, he put his garbage in it, and he left them on his porch. And someone took away the Amazon package. The moral of the story is if you want to steal an Amazon package, take a sniff first. How does smicha get done? Now, this is not discussing the smicha of the kohen gadol on Yom Kippur. We're talking about a regular carbon, a typical person did an avera, and he's bringing a carbon chatos. How does he do the smicha? So, Zok the Gemara, hazevach oimed b'tzafim. The zavach will be, the animal will be to the north of the mizbeach, upanav l'mayr, and the animal will be facing west. The owner of the carbon will also stand with his back to the east and his front facing the ulam. And he puts his two hands in between the two horns of the carbon. So he puts his hands directly on the head of the animal. His hands have to be directly touching the head of the zebach, meaning he can't have one hand on top of the other. They have to be spread out, and he's got to be directly touching the head of the animal. Umisvada, and he says vidui. Al chatos, if it's a carbon chatos that he's bringing, then avoin chatos. They'll say vidui for that very he did. Maybe he was machal Shabbos b'shoigig. Right? Vial osham, for the osham, he'll do vidu for the avoin osham. Vial oila, and if it was an oila, so chatos, we know all of the chiyuva, anyone who's chayiv karish for a mezid, if he did that a very b'shoigig, he brings a chatos. Osham, the Torah lists off the different people who bring an osham, right? Osham gzelas, osham shulchan charuva, Hashem Nazir, Hashem Mitzayra. But the Oila, it doesn't specify what the Aver is for. So the Gemara understands that it has to be an Aver that there's no specified Oynish for. Because if there's a specified Oynish, that's the Kapara for it. So it's got to be servicing something that doesn't have a specified Oynish. So the Gemara suggests, Val Oila, it'll be the oven Leket Shikhu Peah. If someone didn't leave over Leket Shikhu Peah, Rashi takes out the word Maiserani, but Tosfos includes the word Maiserani. The reason why Rashi takes out the word Maiserani is because we do Vidu Maisris, right? At the end of the period of time where you have to get rid of your Maisris, you say Lechalti Badi Mimeni, V'Lasati Min Leis. There's a whole Vidu Maisris that you do. So Rashi just, since you say Vidu Maisris, it doesn't make sense that you should say Vidu over here, which is very difficult to understand. Tosfos asks. Because the Vidu Maisris, you don't say that you did something wrong, you're actually listing off that you did it right. So what type of Vidu is that? So that's why Tosfos is Goris Maiseran. So Leket Shikron Peah, which are not Lavin, there is a Lav there, it says Loy, Rashi in the middle tells the Pasuk, it says you're not allowed to take these things. Right? There's a lav on these things, but this is the lav that it's referring to because these lavin don't get malchus. Rabbi Kiva Eimer, Ein oila ba ella ala say, either on the mitzvah say, where there's no specified oynish for, and the aloisa say shenitek lasay, and aloisa say that's nitek lasay. For instance, loy sigzoil. If someone does steal, he doesn't get malchus. Because there's a lav in it says v'heishiv is exel. So since this lav doesn't get malchus, therefore the way you get a kapara for such a lav is to bring a carbon oil. So we have a machloikis between Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Yosy Glili if Leket Shikron Peah qualify as a lav that does not get malchus, and therefore you could bring a carbon oil for it. Or maybe it's a lav that does get malchus, and if it's a lav that does get malchus, then in fact you wouldn't bring a carbon oil for it, because malchus is the kapara. So frankly, in what does this machloikis hinge upon? Rabbi Yirmiyah says, Bilav de nevela kamifah. They're arguing about a lav de nevela. They're arguing about the lav of nevela. What's unique about the lav de nevela? So Rashi tells us, it says in the say afterwards, it says lager asher b'sharecha titnenevachla, give it to a guy. So it says lo soichal nevela, which is a lois aseh, lo soichal kol nevela, and then it says lager asher b'sharecha titnenevachla. So the question is this a lav and intek laseh? By gzela, don't steal. If you steal, you can fix it by giving it back. But by nevela, it can't be a lav and intek laseh. Don't eat it, but if you ate it, give it to a guy. If you ate it, you can't give it to a goy anymore. So obviously, the assay is actually chronologically occurring before the lois aseh. In other words, don't eat it. Instead of eating it, give it to a goy. So that's not really a good lav hanitek laseh, which means there should be a chiv malchus for eating an avela. If there's a chiv malchus for it, then you cannot use a carbon oila to be mechaper, because the carbon oila will only be mechaper for averes that have no other specified oynish. So belav the devela kamivli. Rabbi Kiva over lav ma'al you. Rabbi Kiva says it's a regular lav because it's not nitek laseh, because the lager asher b'shrechat tetnenev achla does not correct the iser, and therefore you get malchus for it. If you get malchus for it, then surely you cannot bring a carbon oil for it. And Rabbi Kiva extends that to the lav of leket shikran peah. It says the leket katzich aloy salaket laani v'lager tazoyvaysham. Leave it over to an ani and a ger. So there's also a lav and an assay. Rabbi Kiva says the assay of tazoyv is not correcting. It's not correcting the iser of loy salaket. It's also comes before. What should you do with it? Tazoyvaysham, leave it to the guy, and loy salatenu, just like nevela. And therefore, according to Rabbi Kiva, just like nevela, leket shikram peah, you get malchus for it. And if you get malchus for it, surely a carbon oil is not the right kapara for it. But for Yosy Gluyas over, lav ma'al yehu, the lav of nevela and the lav of leket chikon are not proper lavin. You would not get malchus for them, and since you would not get malchus for them, their proper kapara is a carbon oil. Why would you not get malchus for them? Rabbi Kiva has a very good argument that the assay is not correcting the lois assay. So Rashi tells us that we learn the flagship case of malchus is stated regarding the lav of loisachsum shor b'dishay. You're not allowed to muzzle an animal when it's working for you, and there's no if, ands, or buts. There's no exclusions, exceptions, suggestions. I say it's a simple, straightforward lav. And we learn from there that the only type of lavin that you get malchus for are simple, straightforward lavin. So even though nevela and leket shikampea might not fit into the classic lav hanitik lasei, but it still doesn't compare to the flagship lav. And therefore you won't get malchus for it. If you don't get malchus for it, then the carbon oil could be mechaper on it. Abaya Omar, the chula ama lav nevela lav ma'al yav. Everybody would agree by the lav nevela. V'hacha, they're only arguing whether or not the lav of leket ketzircha loisalaket, if that's a lav hanitik lasei. But tazav kamiflagi. The Rabbi Akiva says over tazav meikor mashma. Rabbi Akiva says that when it says tazav, it means leave it over, abandon it for the ani, and don't take it, which means the assay is chronologically before the lav. It basically learns that you're even allowed to give, let's say you don't leave the leket chikopeh, you take it, you grind it, you make flour, you make bread. If Yosy holds, even if you made bread already, you can still give that bread to the ani. So clearly the tazoiv is a corrective action after you didn't abandon it. So therefore it's a good lav anitik lasei, which means there's no din malchus for it, and therefore the carbon oil will be mechaper for it. So this gives us a great link to Shavuos. Chaim Tzvi Margulis, I don't know if anybody knows who he is, but he's the son-in-law of Avram Weisbrod, and he gives a Daf Yomi Mishir every day in Chavashas. I highly recommend it. He's a genius, and he always has a beautiful Torah, and he always tries to connect the Daf of the day to the day. So this was the Daf for the first day Shavuos. So he said, beautiful. It says, La'oni v'lager tazoiv. The word tazoiv actually spells the word boyaz. He said this over from somebody. It spells the word boyaz with an extra suf. The word right before tazoiv is La'oni v'lager tazoiv. So that reish at the end of ger with the suf at the beginning of tazoiv is rus. So lager tazoiv is rus and boyaz. Zok there also beautiful is that Malchus Beis David all started because of the mitzvah of Leket Chikhampeah. Because how did Rus, where did she meet him? Where is their first date? Their first date was by a Leket collection process. That's where they first met. So you see how the Leket Chikhampeah is what was the first ingredient, the first part of that courtship. And that led to Malchus Beis David. So there's a strong connection between this Gemara and Shavuos. Tanu Rabbanan. Ketzad Misvada. How do you say vidui? And when we learned this the first time, Mechi asked a question of visi pashati v'chatosi, which really is out of order because avoin is amazing. Like I needed to have that steak, so I ate it even though it was an avela. Pashati is rebellious. That's a lahachas avera. That's like eating the apple with a worm in it. I don't know if I said over the story about the apple with the worm. There was once an old Abikoris, he did every avera in the book. He was on his deathbed. And right before he died, he asked his children, please bring me an apple with a worm in it. So his children told him, Tati, I don't understand. All the averas you did, you couldn't limit yourself to the Torah. You wanted to eat treif, you wanted to do other averas, but this doesn't taste good. There's nothing to it. Why would you want to just to beat it to an avera? She said, my dear children, I know that I'm going to be going to Gehenna. I've done so many averas in my lifetime, and it's going to seem like the Gehenna is never going to end. This way, when they start giving me petch for eating the apple with the worm, at least I'll know that the end is coming. So that's why I want the apple with the worm. Zok the Gemara weiter, and chatasi is a shoygig. So normally when you ask for something, someone told me when I asked my grandfather for money, first I ask him for $20. If he gives it to me, then I'll ask him for $500. If he gives that to me, then I'll ask him for a down payment. But if I first ask him for a down payment, he'll throw me out on my head. So it's interesting how the video here is a little bit out of what we would consider a logical order. And that's what Mechi asked when we learned the Mishnah, and that's what the Gemara is going to discuss. So you find this unusual order as well by the Seir Mishtalech. Whoever the pasuk says, "Vizvada lo v'skol avonos b'nei Yisrael," which is Mezid. V'skol Pesheim is Lahachis, and L'chol Chatosim is B'shoigim. So you find this unusual order there. The Chen b'Moshe you find this unusual order. Whoever noisei avoin v'fesha v'chata, which is in our Shlosh Shemidas. Divrei Reb Meir, you stick to the unusual order. Which is how we do it. Avonos elo asdoinos. Avonos are Mezid. V'cheinu oimer hikaris tekaris hanafashahi avoinaba. Peshoyim is b'mardus. It's b'lahachis. Elo amordim. V'cheinu oimer melech moyav poshabi. The melech moyav is rebelling in me. V'oimer os tifsha livna be'esahi. The city of Livna was rebelling against the king. So you see that pasha means rebellious. And the chol chatosim elo ashkagos. That's a shogim. V'cheinu oimer nefesh kishechta b'shchaga. So Freiter Rabbanon, my Akash Vadal is a doinos. Valamerdim, if you already got Hashem to be moichel among the Zadoinis and on the merit, the pshias, so for sure the Hashem will throw in as a bonus the shogigs. That's an easy one. Chayzum is Vadal Ashkagos, so he says Vida the Shkagos, that's already included. He's asking for even more than that. Elo, because of that, the Rabbanon says you do it differently, which is how we do it. Alakachayim is Vada, Chatasi, Vavizi, Upashati Lafanecha Nu Basi. And David who Aimer Chatani Chatanu Ima Vaisenu Havinu Virsharnu. And Bishlomo who Aimer Chatani Virshanu Maradnu. And Benil Aimer Chatani Vavinu Virshanu Maradnu. So let me stop a second. You know what? Let's go to the end of the sugya. So if that's the right order according to Rabbanan, so how do you explain why Moshe Rabbeinu said it in an unusual order? Elamau Shomer Moshe Nois Ovim Pesha V'Chato. Why did he do it in an unusual fashion? So tomorrow Moshe was coming with a different twist. Amar Moshe Lefnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I know Klal Yisrael now is not doing tshuva me'afa, but maybe they're doing tshuva me'yira, and therefore Rebbeinu Shalom b'shah sheYisrael chaytin lefanecha. Boys in tshuva, when they do averis and they do tshuva, asay lahem zdoinus kishkagos. Make the make the ovain and the pesha, make it into a chatos, because we know if you do tshuva me'ava, if you do tshuva me'yira, it's a doinos nasus kishkagos. And that's what Moshe was asking. I'm not asking to throw away the averis. That's too much to ask. I'm just asking, since there's a tshuva me'yira, make the averis that the Klal Yisrael did, the mezid, make it into a shogig. That's all I'm asking. Okay. Amar Rabba Bar Shmuel, Amar Rav, halacha gedivrei chachamim, the halacha like the chachamim, which is what we do. In fact, Pshita, why do I need Rabba to tell me that? We know Yochad Rab Malach Rabbim. So Kamar Mai to Mr. Time Reb Meir. You might think that maybe Reb Meir has a very good point. The Messiah like Krada Moshe, because he brings Moshe's psukim. There are those who take out the gears of Moshe, and he brings all the psukim that show the many different times where it was this unusual order. Kamash Malon, that you still stick to the Rabban because you go Basarat. Zok the Gemara story. How do Nachas Kamei the Rabba? Once upon a time, in Rabba's shul, they heard about Tefillah for Yom Kippur, and Rabbi Reb Meir, and he did the video like Reb Meir. Amr later, Rabbi told about Tefillah, what's the matter with you? Shavkas Rabban and Vavid Reb Meir, you're passing in Shaloik Halacha, you're saying the video wrong. Amr later, but Tefillah answered Reb Meir severely. I like Reb Meir's approach. K'dichsev b'sefer arise the Moshe, like it says in the Chumash of Moshe. So the Maskana, even though the halacha is like the Rabbim, you see from this Gemara that if you did it the other way, you don't have to say it over, because you see Rabbah accepted the Baal Tefillah's comment that he wanted to say it like a mayor. I just have one question, and I don't have the answer. I can tell you what some people told me, but I'm stuck. The Rabbanan wanted to illustrate how Pesha means Mardus, it's a rebellion, and he brought these psukim of Melech Moed Pasha, Ostif and Livna, and an avoin is amazing, which to me amazing means l'tayofin. I mean, I gotta have that steak, even though it's not kosher. I'm going to eat it anyway. What was the pasuk he brought? He kares to kares hanefesh avoin neba. I want to read you the context of that pasuk, and I want you to tell me if you think that is amazing like litei ovein, or if that's lahachis, or if that's someone who's trying to rebel against Hakadosh Baruch Hu. So it's in Parsha Shlach Tesvov Lamed Gimel, I believe. So let's see where I am over here. Tesvov. Let's see if I can find. Oh, here it is. It says as follows: V'hanefesh asher tasa biyod roma. If a guy does it with a tough hand, min ne'ejoch min ager, it's Hashem who megadav. He's cursing Hashem. V'necheres as nefesh he meker avamo. He should be cursed. Rashi says it's going on biyod roma mecharif, cursing Hashem. Okay, and it says why? Kidvar Hashem boza. He's embarrassing the word of Hashem. It's mitzvah hefar. He courage to courage a nefesh shehi avoinabo. Does this not sound like merit to you? And the Gemara is bringing this as the example of an oven. So I don't have an answer, but I asked this question to Rabbi Robinson, and Rabbi Robinson told me today that maybe you see a big lesson from here. Sometimes a person is angry at Hashem and he curses Hashem. So you assume that's merit. Maybe not. Maybe the guy's in pain. And because of that, he expresses that he's upset at the Rebbeinu Shalom. And that might also be the Te'ofen. So he says, Fakert, maybe the reason why the Gemara by us, B'davka picked this, is to tell you, don't write people off so quickly. If you see someone cursing Hashem, maybe because something's hurting him, he's going through a difficult time, but it's not considered a merit, that's also just because someone's going through a very hard time and he's taking it out on the Rebbeinu Shalom. So it sort of flips it around. Don't look at it like merit. Even when someone's doing something like that, maybe it's just because he's amazed because he's in pain. But the kasha did bother me that Kidvar Sham Boza, that's like one of the most severe comments the Torah makes, yet it's still called Avain. Let's see the Gemara weiter. Tanya Rabban. V'chiper. It says v'chiper ba'adoy ba'ad beisoy after the Kohen Gadol does his vidoi. The Torah says v'chiper ba'adoy ba'ad beisoy. So the Gemara says b'kaparas devar makosuf medaber. You know what affects the kapara? It's the vidoi, not the zrikas dam. Maybe it's the zrika of the dam on the mizbech that affects the kapara. So tomorrow harayani dam. Well, let's analyze this. Remember kan kapara. It says v'chiper ba'adoy ba'ad beisoy our par over here. Remember lalam kapara. It says by the sir mishaleach. It says there's a kapara. Ma kapara ha'amar b'sir is devarim. By the seir, the kapara there is for sure not from the blood on the mizbeach, because there is no blood on the mizbeach. You're just pushing it off a cliff. So there, the kapara must be affected by the vidoy. So let's argue then, af kapara hamur b'par is devarim. If you don't like my raya, if I'm comparing it to the Sir Mishaleach, I'll bring you a more explicit raya, mineu bay, in the psukim discussing this par. Because it says in the pasuk, v'hikriv Aaron is par achatat hashaloi, v'chiber ba'adeu ba'ad beisa. So it clearly says there's a kapara there. V'adayin l'nishchat a par, and only the next pasuk talks about shechting the par. So the Torah says v'chiber ba'adeu ba'ad beisa even before it's shechted. So wouldn't that prove pretty clearly that the kapara is affected before it's even shechted? Why is it that the Gemara felt the need to bring a second raya? What was wrong with the comparison to the Shir Mishaleach? So the Gemara is very simple. Why compare it to the Shir Mishaleach? Maybe compare it to the Shir Lashem, where you do spritz the blood on the Mizbech. So for that, the Gemara brought the second reason. Zog the Gemara weiter. Uminayin sheba ona. Our Mishnah says the Kohen Gadol says ona b'Hashem, ona Hashem. Please, why? Where do you get this idea that when you say vidu you say ona? Zog the Gemara never kan kapara. It says v'chiber b'adei b'ad beisoy by the par, but never lahalim b'chayev kapara. And when Moshe Rabbeinu was beseeching the Rebbeinu Shalom to be Moichel Klal Yisrael for the Cheta Egel, it says ulai achapra bat kataschem. Rashi says sumala alon. Just like when Moshe was beseeching the Rebbeinu Shalom for a kapara on the Chet HaEgel, ba'ana, it says ana chata ha'amazeh. So Moshe used the word ana. Afkan ba'ana. So we'll argue that when the Kohen is asking for a kapara about a vidu, he uses the word ana, which we do as well in our vidu. Uminayim shebeshem. How do you know that he uses the name of Hashem? Moshe did not. So how do you know he used the name of Hashem? So tomorrow we learn from a different passage. Nemer kan kapor. It says kapor over here by par. And nemer be'egla rufa kapor. And he uses the word kapor by egla rufa. It says kaper la'amcha Yisrael asher prodisa Hashem. It has the name of Hashem there. Mal alom b'Shem. Just like in the vidui of the egla rufa, it mentions Hashem's name. Avkan b'Shem. So we have three things over here. We're teaching to the power of the Kohen. We're learning it from Moshe asking Hashem to be Mechabed Eden on the Egel. That's where we learn honor from. And Hashem's name we learn from Egla Rufa. Well, why don't Egla Rufa and Moshe learn from each other as well? Let's make a full love triangle there. Amar Abaya, Bishlam Achayev Egla Rufa Lo Yolef. Don't ask me, Kasha, why Moshe Rabbeinu didn't learn from Egla Rufa and why he didn't say Hashem's name. Because Maida Hava. Moshe, that story is over already. And Moshe didn't use the Hashem's name. And by the way, he succeeded anyway, right? So we're not going to ask that kasha. But Egla Rufa, which we could learn for the future, Telef Mechayev. Why doesn't Egla Rufa also employ the word Ana? Just like we're saying that we learn from Moshe Rabbeinu to the vidui of the Kohen Gadol that he says Ana, why don't you learn Kapara from Moshe Rabbeinu to Egla Rufa that you say Ana? And if you argue, in fact, that by Egla Rufa, the Kohen does say Ana, well, the Brisa doesn't say that. The Brisa doesn't say that the Kohen used the word Ana. So the Markasha, it's fair, but it's not really fair. The teretz is that Avadi say Ana. Even though the Brisa doesn't state it, Beferish, it still means that you do say Ana and you do learn information. The Klal Yisrael answers back, Baruch Shem Kavod Mechusei L'Olam V'ed. Where do you get this from? Tanya Rabbi Omer, Kishem Hashem Ekra, when I call out the name of Hashem, Havu Gadol Elokeinu, give Gedula to the Rebbeinu Shalom by saying Baruch Shem Kavod Mechusei. Amar Moshe Yisrael, B'shah Shani Maskish Moshe LaKadosh Baruch Hu, when I mention Hashem's name, Atem Havu Gadol, you'll praise it. Chananya ben Achi Rabbi Shua, Chananya the nephew of Rabbi Shua said, it says Zecher Tzadik L'Vracha. What does that mean? Amar Lam Navi Yisrael, B'shah Shani Maskish Tzadik Ha'Olamim, when I mentioned the Tzadik Ha'Olamim, Rebbeinu Shalom, Atem Pnu Bracha, you give a bracha by saying Baruch Shem. And we actually say Baruch Shem quite a bit because in Kaddish, Amen Yehei Shmei Rabbah is actually it's in Aramaic. It's Baruch Shem Kavod Mechusei in Aramaic. So we all every time we answer to Kaddish, Amen Yehei Shmei Rabbah, we're actually saying Baruch Shem. Next, he finished with the par, and now he's going to deal with the two seirim. So Bala the Mizrach HaZorah. He went to the Mizrach side of the Azara. He walks all the way to the entrance of the Azara. L'tzafayin HaMizbeach, but he stays north of the Mizbeach. Hasgan Miminai, his second in command is to his right. Rosh Beishav Mismailai, and so the Gaba, the Rebbe's Gaba is on his right, and the Rosh HaKuhal is on his left. Visham Shnei Seirim, there at the eastern side of the Azara, the northeast side, there were the two Seirim. So even though they're not shechting them, anything to do with these karbanas has to be done on the north half of the Azara. The Kalpi Hasham, and there was a little box there where they had the Goyrelin. Ubash Negerolis, Shalash Geroyah. There were two Goyrellis, and they were made out of boxwood. I don't know what boxwood is, but the article says Ashkeroyah is boxwood. The Ozon Ben Gamla, I doubt it means leftover wood from a pallet that you cut apart. It's probably a type of wood. The Ozon Ben Gamla Shozov. Ben Gamla was a Kohen Gadol. He had some money, so he upgraded the Goyrellis from boxwood to gold. And that was mentioned as good because he used Machabed the Beis Hamikdash by upgrading the ballots. Ben Ketin, who was also a Kohen Gadol, also Yud Beis Dod Lekir. He made 12 spigots to the Kiyar because originally there were only 2 spigots, and he made 12. And the Gemara tells us why. We learned it already earlier, so that the first shift of Kohanim during the Karban Tamid, there were 12 Kohanim who won, and they were all able to come together and make Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim at the same time. V'avu also Muchani Lakir. He also made a winch. He set up a winch that was able to lower the kiyar into the the Amma that was going through into the water, that was going through the Azara overnight. What was the benefit of that? The water in it would have become possible by staying overnight, but the fact that they lowered it down into the river, it was connected to the spring, it was not possible. So that was a big accomplishment. Munbas HaMelech, he took all of the different kalim that were used on Yom Kippur, and he upgraded only their handles to gold. Why not all keli? Just a handle. The Gemara is going to ask that. Hilani Amalka, which interesting enough, if you ever went recently to Israel and you went to Ir David, directly across the street from Ir David, there used to be a parking lot there, which they excavated in, and they uncovered a palace. And they have a lot of proof that that was actually the palace of Hilane Hamalka. It was a beautiful palace. And maybe 10 years ago, there was a British girl who was one of the students that was volunteering to sift, and she touched some wall in that palace, and like 100 golden coins, priceless coins, fell out of nowhere, and they were blown away by them. And when the tour guide told me that 100 coins fell out, I said, "Are you sure it wasn't 102 coins? Maybe she only declared 100 coins, but who knows?" Anyway, so she was very wealthy. So she made Asasad Nivresha Shalzov al Pesach Shalhechel. She donated a golden menorah that they placed at the doorway to the Hechel, and the Gemara will explain what its function was. Va'afi Asasad Tabla Shalzov. She also made a tablet of gold, Shapasha Soita Ksuvala, that had the Pasha of Soita written on it. The halacha is, if there's a Soita, the Kohen would have to write out the whole Pasha of Soita, which interesting is this week's Pasha. It's Pasha's Nosai. They would write the whole Pasha of Soita, and when the ink was wet, they would pour Mayim Chaim over it, and then they would wipe out the writing with water, and then that was the water that she had to drink. So normally, what they would have to do is take out a Sefer Torah, so the Kohen Gadol, the Kohen writing it, could copy from the Sefer Torah. He needed a Tikkun Sefer, which wasn't so much covered for a Sefer Torah. So she just took a gold tablet, she wrote all Parsha on it, and this way the Kohen can use that as a Tikkun. Someone asked me, it's a little bit troublesome to see that she actually needed to make a template. Does that mean there were so many saitis that this was done so many times that they actually need a template? It's like of all things that she would do. But now as I'm talking, I'm thinking to the contrary. If it was so commonplace, the Kohen would have already known the Parsha by heart. He wouldn't have needed a template. He needed a template because maybe it wasn't done often. But it's still a little funny why she would pick this B'davka to do. Kasher. Niknor, Nasu Nisim Yosef. He donated doors to the Beis HaMikdash, and Nisim happened with them. And all these people, they mentioned them L'Shvach because they made nice contributions to the Beis HaMikdash that made a difference. Where did they prepare the Sir Mishalayach, the two Sirim and the Goyrel? North of the Mizbeach. That means it was north of the north wall of the Mizbeach. Why couldn't you make it lower than the north wall of the Mizbeach? So we know there's a machlokes where the Mizbeach was. Was the Mizbeach smack dab in the middle of the Azara? And if that's the case, it would have blocked the entire door to the Ulam. Or was the Mizbeach only in the south side of the Azara, which means it only blocked half of the door of the Ulam? So Zok the Gemara, since the Mishnah says they had to be standing north of the Mizbeach, it must be that the Mizbeach wasn't over the center line and part of it was not in the north. Because if part of it was in the north, then you don't have to be north of the Mizbeach. You can either be on either side of the Mizbeach as long as you're on the north side of the Azara. From the fact that the Mishnah said it had to be north of the Mizbeach, it must be that the Mizbeach is completely in the south half of the Azara, and therefore it would only be considered Tzafin if you were north of the Mizbeach. Mani, who is that going like? Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. It has to be going according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, who learned that the Mizbeach was completely in the south side of the Azara. The Tanya Tzafayin Lefnei Hashem, she Tzafayin Kulei Pani. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov learns that north of the Mizbeach, the Torah tells us, has to be clear real estate. You can't obstruct it with anything. All of the real estate that was north of the Mizbeach till the north wall of the Zorah had to be kept clear. You couldn't put the Mizbeach on that site. For the Gemara, the problem is, didn't we just say my last Mishnah that it's going according to Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon, and that's why they were able to bring the par bein ulam the Mizbeach? If the par was bein ulam the Mizbeach, clearly the side of the Mizbeach is also considered suffering, which means the Mizbeach must have been halfway in the north and halfway in the south. No, Kula Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. Really, the Mizbeach was completely in the south. So how could you possibly put the animal between the Mizbeach and the Ulam? That would be on the south side, which is not allowed. It wasn't literally, the animal wasn't literally in between the Ulam and the Mizbeach. The animal was to the north, but it was in that space of east-west between the Ulam and the Mizbeach. So it was in the strip of land that went in between the Ulam and the Mizbeach, but it was further north to the top of the Azara, so that would be completely in the north. So that changes what we said earlier, that it's going according to Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon. It's really going according to Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, and the animal was not between the Ulam and the Mizbeach. The animal was further north. Zok to Gemara. Now we're going to get to easy Gemaras. Haskan b'minoi. The skan was at the right side of the Kohen Gadol. V'rosh b'sav b'smoiloi. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Hamahalach liyamin rabbi. If somebody walks to the right of his Rebbe, harei a boor. He is a boor. What is a boor? Not just that he's not a Talmud Chacham. Rashi says harei a boor afilu b'derech eretz nebaki. He's not a mensch. He's a mensch. Forget Talmud Chacham. He's a jerk. He's a lowlife. He doesn't know how to behave. The problem is our Mishnah seems to say otherwise. Tanan askal b'minoi. V'reish b'zav b'smoiloi. If he's a boor, how could the skal be b'minoi? V'oitanya, we learned another brayso. Shloisha shoyol halchem b'derech. If three people are walking on the road, harab v'emsa, the rab will be in the middle. Gadol b'minoi, the gadol will be on his right. The katan b'smoiloi. So once again, you see that that's the right way. So how could you say it's a boor? Michal was be'emtza, Gabriel was b'minoi, or Fall was smoiloi. So I just want to stop to ask the oilam. I'm not the expert in the status of malachim. Why is it that Michal is considered the Rav and Gabriel is considered the second in command and Rafal is the third in command? Does anybody know why? I'm assuming Moisture and I'm named his son Michal. You should be able to tell me why Michal was the prime malach, who gets to stand in the middle. I don't have an answer. Chaim Tzvi suggested that when the three malachim came to Avram, Michal had the first job. Michal's job was to tell Avram that he was going to have a child. Gabriel had the second job to destroy Sodom, and Rafal had the third job to heal Avram. So it could be, since Michal was doing the first job, he was considered center stage, and the malach to do the second job was a second in command, and Rafal was the third. That's what he suggested. But if anybody knows how malachim work and which malach is greater than the others, please share it. Anyway, but we have a problem here. We know if you stand to the right of your Rebbe, you're a boor, yet you have all these cases where someone's standing to the right of the Rebbe. So it means he stands behind the Rebbe. No one's standing beside the Rebbe. They're standing behind the Rebbe. One a little to the right, but behind the Rebbe, and one a little bit to the left behind the Rebbe. For Gemara, how could you say that? If you walk beside your Rebbe, you're a boor. But a chayre rabbi, if you walk behind your Rebbe, harezim megase ruach, you're a bal gaiva. And for the Gemara, it doesn't mean directly behind your Rebbe. It's like a segoil. So the greater Talmud stands behind the Rebbe, but off to the right, and the lesser Talmud stands behind the Rebbe, but off to the left. Now, why is it that if you stand right behind your Rebbe, you're megase ruach? And the answer is, if anybody remembers, when we were growing up, they had lead pencils. And if you remember, the lead pencils had a whole bunch of mini tips, and when the tip would get dulled, you would pull it out, and you would snip it in through the bottom, and it would force the next tip up. Do you remember those pencils, those lead pencils? Like a Pez dispenser almost. So that's exactly how this works. If you stand behind your Rebbe, sorry? If you stand behind your Rebbe,
you put it on the bottom, it goes to the top.
No, you put the lead pencil. You took the rubbed out lead point and you put it into the bottom of the pencil, and that pushed the next one up. I remember those growing up. So that's how it works. The person
you put it in
standing
the
by the Rebbe.
pencil and
I'm
down.
sorry.
You
I
put
can't
it
hear
in
what
the
you're saying.
top and it pushes the next one down.
No, you don't. You're not old enough. You're a youngin. You don't remember. You would take the tip off the top and put it into the bottom. When you push it into the bottom, it would push the next lead up to the top of the thing. You Google it, old-fashioned lead pencils. Now you twist and it moves up the ink. They have long things of ink, long things of lead, you twist and it moves up. But in our days, you took the top pit and you put it into the bottom like a pen dispenser. Okay, it's good. You're a young guy. You don't remember those things. Anyway, I see Ephraim remembers. He's smiling. Ephraim remember those lead pencils.
Yeah. I remember.
The good old days. I'm not sure where the eraser was. Could be they had a removable eraser that you took off so you can push the thing in the bottom. Otherwise, I'm not sure how that worked exactly. These are the sweet days of the good old days. Okay, when television was still black and white, like a lead pencil. Anyway, so that's what the problem here. If you're standing behind your Rebbe, it means you're trying to push him out to the next position, just like the lead pencil. That's why it's Gasai Ruach, because it means you're trying to displace your Rebbe. And Chaim Tzvi mentioned that he thinks Rashi says when Nadav and Avihu walked behind Moshe and Aaron, he said they walked behind Moshe and Aaron. They asked, when will these two Altachkas die so we can take over? So you see that attitude when you walk behind your Rebbe, you're trying to displace him. Zok Gemara weiter. The Kalpi Haisasham, there was a little ballot box. Uvash Negerolis, it had two ballots. Tonar Rabbanan. Benosan Aharon al Shnei Seirim Gairolis. Aharon put on two Seirim Gairolis plural, and the Rashi tells us Gairolis shall call over. These ballots can be made out of any material. It says ala Seirim Gairolis. Put on the two Seirim plural Gairolis. That means you put two Gairolis in each one, which doesn't make any sense. Talmud Loimer Gairol Echad Lashem, the Gairol Echad Lazazel. In kan Lashem el Gairol Echad. There's only one Gairol that says Lashem. Then kan Lazazel el Echad. Frek the Gemara. Yochal Yitain shel Shem v'shel Azazel al Zeh v'shel Shem v'shel Azazel al Zeh. You might think that you should put both ballots on both of the animals. Frek Rashi. If you do that, so how in the world are you going to know which one is Lashem and which one is Azazel if you're putting them both on both? There's Rashi, the Eza Sheyirtza Yasa Lashem, and you pick it out. So it's a Sham Goyrel. You pick anyone you want to be Lashem, and you put the Goyrel on both. Tosus learns, no, it wouldn't be a Sham Goyrel. Tosus learns, first you make a proper Goyrel. You put the Lashem on one and the Azazel on the other. And then after you determine which is Lashem, which is Azazel, then you swap them. So they each had an opportunity to get each one on them. And for the Dr. Gemara, you don't do that either. Talmud Leimer Gairol Echad Lashem. Ein kan Lashem ela Echad, vein kan Azazel ela Echad. So talking about Hashem Gairol, I have a friend who once bought a raffle offered in Toronto. One of the schools in Toronto offered a raffle, $100 a ticket, and you would win $36,000. Now I have a friend who's a very, very wealthy person. And he told me he gets a call from the principal and he says, Raplani Almighty, congratulations, you won the $36,000. So he said, great. But you know what? I understand you're a Moisid. You probably can't afford the money. Just give me 18,000 and let the Moisid keep 18,000. And the line goes silent. So he says, hello, are you there? Silence. He says, okay, you know what? Forget it. You can keep 20. Just give me 16. Silence. He said, okay, how about if you keep 25? Just give me 11. Silent. Then he said, you know what? Keep it all. Don't ever call me again. So I told my friend, I have no doubt that they picked your name out from the ballot box fair and square. The question merely is how many names they picked out first before they picked out your name. And had they known what your response would have been, they would have probably continued going until they picked somebody else who they knew would have given it all back. Zok to Gemara. Im Kain. So Moshe Rubner told me that he once, Meyer Weinstock, Olav Shalom, who was a very big Baal Tzedakah, asked him to buy a raffle, asked Moshe Rubner to buy a raffle to win $5,000 that B'nai Torah Shul was making. So Moshe, look, I'm going to buy B'nai Torah to shul. I don't have to support the shul. Let their own members support them. But if Meyer wants to ask you, you give, because Meyer was a big Baal Tzedakah. So he bought it. Meyer calls him a week later, says, Moshe, you won $5,000. So he tells Moshe, you don't really want the money, do you? So Moshe says, you know what, I'll give it to Tzedakah, but I'll give it to my Tzedakahs. Give me the money. So for the next 6 weeks, he got Mishalachim knocking on the door every day. Mr. Weinstock told me that you just won $5,000. You have extra money to give to Tzedakah. So Meyer was one step ahead of him. Zog Gemara Vacher, Im came. Ma Tamid Leimar. So then Moshe tells me that Dave Zolti once asked him also to buy a raffle for some Moshe that he would normally not give to. And he bought the raffle, and Dave calls him a couple of days later, you won $5,000. So Moshe tells Dave Zolti, don't say any more. Just send me a receipt. He didn't even bother. Send me a receipt for the 5,000. Okay, talking about Im Kain. So why does it say Goyra Lois, plural? Sheyu Shoven. You have to make sure that both ballots are identical. Or Echad Godel Vechad Katan. They have to be the same, either both the same material, both the same size. Goyra Lois shall cold over. The Brisa says they can be made out of anything. Pshita. Why would you say otherwise? So tomorrow Lord Shricha. We learned Lefisha Masinu B'Tzitz. It says on the tzitz where it says Kodesh Lashem, so it has Hashem's name. Hashem Kosovalov. And who shall zov? It has to be made out of gold. Yochalav Zekim. So you might think that at least the ballot that says Lashem on it should have to be made out of gold. Talmud Leimer Goyro Riba. It's Marba Riba Shal Sayis. It includes olive wood, and that's why the olive wood factory makes everything out of olive wood, because you're even allowed to make the goyrolos for the Sir Lazozel, the Sir Lashem out of olive wood. This is where the olive wood factory got its origins. Riba Shal Egois, it could be nut wood, or Riba Shal Ashkroik, or it could be boxwood. So Kamar Baita, Ben Katin was a Kohen Gadol, also Shnei Masha Dod Lakir. He made 12 spigots. Tana, we learned, why did he do that? Kadesh Yu Shnei Asar Echav Kayanim, Hasukin Betamid, Mekachin Yudayim Vergleim Bevasachas. So they could all be Mekadesh Yudayim Vergleim Bevasachas. Now, the way you do Kiddush Yudayim Vergleim is you have to put your hands on top of your feet while keeping them all together, and then they would pour the water on your hands and feet together. Now, I know if I would try that, we would need some type of mechanized equipment to get me back up again from the floor after I toppled over, because I can't touch my toes, even if I bend my knees. And if I try that, I'm not getting up so fast. So, Zok Gemara, before Ben Katin made these 12 spigots, there were only 2 spigots, but they were in the same position. One was higher up and one was lower down. Tana Shachris b'miluai, in the morning, where the kir was still full, Mikadesh Yodav V'Raglav Mila Elyon. He would make Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim from the upper spigot, because the water level was still above that, so you were able to get water out of it. But Arvis, which is when the water level was lower than the top spout, B'Yeridosai, when he's leaving, Mekadesh Yodav V'Raglav Minatachtoin, there the water level was lower, so he had to use the lower spigot. So I didn't understand why can't you always use the lower spigot? Why do you have to use the upper spigot? So I thought that if you have an old Kohen who can't bend down, they had a bench or they had a stool or some type of stool that he was able to sit on, and then he put his hands and feet together. But that would be more convenient to use the upper level spigot. But once the water level went down, he couldn't use it anymore. There are those who say that the water pressure would be too strong coming out of the lower spigot, and it would splash too much. That's why they use the upper spigot. There's different svaras for that. But I'll call upon them. That's how it worked, and then they ended up putting 12. Now, what the Olam asks is, we know that when you come to do avodah, you have to do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. But Biri Yidosai, when you leave, you don't have to do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. So what's this at the end of the day? So they say if a Kohen came in late because he was maybe going to be putting the Evorim on his Beach, or he had up to nighttime avodah, or if he was Mesiach Das, there would be a need for him to do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim in the afternoon. Zokter Marbaiter. V'afu also Muchni Lakir, Munbaz HaMelech made a Muchni for the Kir. My Muchni, what is a Muchni? A Marbaya Gilgala. It was a winch with a wheel, like a pulley, to have a mishkale that they were able to lower the kiyar into the water with. The Rambam and the Meiri learned that it was not a winch to lower the whole kiyar into the water. Rather, it was a separate reservoir that held water that was not kadosh, and therefore the water in that separate reservoir would not become puzzle overnight. But that also had to be lowered into the water to fill up, and they used that to fill the kiyar, and that's why there's the galgala. He made all the handles of the kalim, he made them into gold. Frank the Gemara, I don't understand. If he's such a rich, generous guy, why don't you make the whole kalim into gold? Why just the handle? Zok the Gemara, Amar Abaye, it's because it's biyadei sakinim. We're talking about knives. Gold is a soft metal. If you make a blade of a knife out of gold, it's going to crumple. It's not going to work properly. So that's why the blades have to be steel. Only the handles were able to be gold. I'll show you that other kalim besides knives, only the handles were made out of gold. Avu also kane kalim, the bases of the kalim were gold. Ugne kalim, and the handles like of a cup. The yodes kalim, the yodes sakinin. So you see, there were many other kalim that he only made their handles gold, and not the actual keli itself. All of these kalim that we're talking about, that he only made the handles gold, were all some type of cutting, chopping, grinding keli, like an axe or a sickle, but they were all things that the business end couldn't be made out of gold because it would be too soft. Now this is a very important Gemara, because whenever I come to shul and the Vesikim meeting is coming home, they always look at you with that snarl, that arrogant, condescending, you shagit, I daven Vesikim. So you always want to give it back to them. And I just want to remind you that I had a Rebbe, Rabbi Noble, and Rabbi Noble once said that Frim is Rosh Tevis, feel rishis, vainig mitzvahs. That's what Frim is. So these people, Vesikim, they look at you the condescending way. So this is going to be, today we're going to learn how you could undo them in a good way. And you can say, what are you talking about? I'm not a Meko like you. I'm not a Pesheya like you. I daven properly, not give a Vesikim. So let's see this Gemara. I love this Gemara. Tana, what was the purpose of this menorah that Hilni Hamalka donated? When the sun started to shine, which means the sun came up over the eastern horizon, the glare of the sun would glare on this beautiful gold menorah, and it would send the glare all around in all directions. And then everybody will know Krishma started. So right off the bat, you're supposed to say Krishma after Netzachama. You see from here? When do the people who daven Vesikim say Krishma? Before Netzachama. They say the Shemon Esrei Netzachama. So we'll get to the meat and potatoes soon. But I'm already excited. Nesve. Hakayra Shema. If someone says Krishma Shal Shachris together with the Anshe Mishma, so that we know that there was a cycle, and every day of the year there was a different set of Kohanim that did the Avodah, and they started early in the morning. So if you say Krishma with the Anshe Mishma, which would be long before Nates, early in the morning, or Anshe Maimit, what's not so well known is the same way the Kohanim had a rotation, all of the Bnei Yisrael also had a rotation. And every day there was a different group of Yisrael that watched the Avodah. I think there's a weekly rotation that stood there to watch the Avodah. They were representative of Klal Yisrael, and everybody had a chance. You had to come, and they fasted, they said Tehillim, but they stood there and they watched the Avodah. They started even earlier than the Kohanim themselves. They were there from the middle of the night. So if you say Krishma together with them, lo yotza. The people from the Mishra, the Kohanim, say Krishma too early to be yotza. And the people, the Yisraelim who were watching, they said Krishma after Zman Krishma. So they had a special allowance. They were doing their job. But a regular person who tries saying Krishma during those times won't be yotza. But whatever the case is, you see all the people in the base of Mikdash never said Krishma by Netzachama. So who exactly was this menorah for? If the people working in the base of Mikdash didn't use it, because they didn't say it in Nates. She made it not for the people working in the base of Mikdash, for people all over Yerushalayim. They were able to see this glare from far and from wide, and that's how they knew when to say Krishma. So this long toises the re-asks Akasha. Because Abaye says here very clearly that when are you supposed to learn Krishma? After Nates. The problem is, in the Gemara Brachas, it says that Abaye says you should say Krishma like the Vasikin, which is right before Nates, so that they can accommodate the Tefillah, the Shemona Esrei, where it says in the pasuk Yira'ucha im Shemesh, you should express your Yira to the Rebbeinu Shalom from Tefillah with sunrise. And since they wanted to be Saimach Gula L'Tefillah, they would say Krishma, instead of saying Krishma already by Mishayakir, which is the earliest time that you could say it, they would make the Krishma later so that they could say it right before the Shemona Esrei, which clearly says that you said Krishma before Nates. So that's a stira to Abaye over here. So the re-answers that really you're allowed to say Krishma before Nates. However, only the Vasikin are meticulous with being able to assess how light it is and when the time has arrived that you can say Krishma. But a regular guy, if he tries to pull a Vasikin, what's going to happen is he might not assess it properly, and he might say Krishma too early. Now we have watches, we have Zmanim, so anybody is an expert. But in those days, they have to be able to assess from how light it was. If they can tell between a dog and a wolf, if they can tell between green and turquoise, if they can recognize their friend, there's different shiurim of levels of light. If they're not perfect, they might take Krishma too early and it'll mess everything up. So therefore, they pushed it off. They couldn't follow the Vasikin. The Vasikin were very, very expert people. But a regular person would have to wait till after it turned light. That's the Re. Based on the Re, what the people who do Vasikin are doing a perfect job, because nowadays we're all considered Vasikin because we have Zman and we have watches. But the Rabbeinu Tam, we got to read the Rabbeinu Tam inside, because this is our key to giving it back to those Vasikin people. So if you go halfway down the Tosfos, the big lines, the last word on the line is Vir Rabbeinu. So look, Vir Rabbeinu Tam Pirish. Rabbeinu Tam tells us, Tizman Krishma Hava Achar HaNetzachama. The proper time to say Krishma is after Netzachama. Kimasnis in the Hacha. Like our Mishnah says here, that you're supposed to say Krishma after Netzachama. Nuch Shimon. Vavasikin, the Vasikin, the Frimme Vasikin. Hoyimamarim Shaloi Kedin. They said Krishma too early, before Nates. Kodim Netzachama. Why did they do that? Bishvil Choyvas Hatfila. So they wanted to be frim, so they made a mistake. They did the wrong thing. They said Krishma before Nates. So the next time a guy who davens Nates tries to be all better than you, tell him, you guys are saying Krishma too early. You're not even Yotze. You're supposed to say Krishma after Nates. It also makes me feel good because half the time when I try to daven Vasikin, I always show up late. And I never make Shemona Esrei with them. I always end up starting Shemona Esrei when, like 2 minutes later, maybe I get it with the Chazan. But now I feel good because I'm doing it like Rabbeinu Tam. I wasn't late. I'm makbid on Rabbeinu Tam's mouth. The nuzach. If someone tells you how can daven Vasikin, so first says I can't be a maker like you. I'm makbid on Rabbeinu Tam's mouth. So this is your key to be able to give it back to the Vasikin guys. Okay, it just made me feel very good because so many times I felt guilty. I don't have Vasikin, and then especially when I come late to Vasikin, I feel bad. This solves all my problems. Zogt Elik Gemara weiter. Vavi also tablet. She made this tablet to be able to copy the parsha of the Soita. Shmas mina Yosif Amir Kaisun Megil Latinik L'Slamid. Are you allowed to write just a section of the Torah so that we could teach kids how to learn? Or maybe you're not allowed to. Maybe you're only allowed to have the whole Torah written at once. From the fact that she was allowed to make this template, this Tikkun Soifrim, proved that you're allowed to write parts of the Torah. You don't have a riot from here, but Aleph Beis. Maybe she didn't have them write psukim. She just wrote the Rosh Tevis. It was enough for the Kohen writing the Parsha of Soita to remember the words because it had the Rosh Tevis. Meisei Frek the Gemara. Kishu Kaisev, when the Kohen would write the Soita, the Megillah of the Soita, he would look at the template, Roya v'Kaisev, Mashakasav v'Tavla. He would see and write what it says in the Tavla. Doesn't that seem to indicate that the actual words were spelled out? So Gemara, no, Ema Roya v'Kaisev Kamashakasav v'Tavla. He looked and he wrote based on the order of the Rosh Tevis, but it didn't really have all the words written. Meisei Frek the Gemara. Kishu Kaisev. And here it's explicit that the words were written. What did the tablet say? Im shachav is oisach, vim loy shachav, im satis, im loy satis. So clearly it had these words in it. So Gemara Enichnami, it had those words. But those are only the first 3 words of each pasuk. Hasam b'sirugin. Those were the first 3 words of each pasuk, but the rest of the pasuk was still written with Rosh Tevis. So once again, you don't have a raya that you're allowed to. Okay, now let's just finish this last Gemara, and we'll go to the Mishnah. That's what we'll pick up tomorrow. Nikner nasu nisim l'dal soisa. Nisim were made with his doors. Tanarban. Ma nisim nasu l'dal soisa. What type of miracle happened with the doors of Niknar? Amru, they said, Kishalach Niknar l'havidal soisa from Alexander shel Mitzrayim. When Niknar went to bring these doors, to import those doors from Mitzrayim, and they bring a raya from here that even though you're not allowed to live in Mitzrayim, you're allowed to go there for business. There are those Rishonim who hold that the only time you weren't allowed to go to Mitzrayim, that's only when we have Eretz Yisrael. But when we're in Golos and we're all over the place, we are in fact allowed to live in Mitzrayim. The Rambam lived in Mitzrayim because he was on his return trip on the ship. A gale wind came and it was shaking that boat and looked like it was going to sink. And Omar Alov, it doesn't say Omar Nachshel Shabiyam, Omar Alov, which the Rishonim teach us that he knew that only by him it was windy, which means he knew that this was an assignment. Notlu achas mehem, they took one of the doors, they threw it into the ocean. It was the Mediterranean. They threw it in because they were afraid the boat would sink. It was still rough. They wanted to through the second door. Amatu, he stood up, he put his arms around it, and he said, over my dead body. If you're going to throw this door in, I'm going along. The moment the Rebbe Shalom saw such an expression of extreme serious nefesh, and then he felt bad that he let the other one go. Kivin Shigil in the Mola Shalaku, as soon as he got to the port of Tamtan Lod, the door somehow got caught underneath the ship, the one that they threw out, and it was there. Boy, was he happy. I just want to add a question that they asked is why Punk did he become so protective by the second door? Why didn't he try to protect the first door? So I saw 2 terutzim. One teretz is he figures if he holds on to the first door and they throw him out with the door, then he's going to lose that door too because they're going to steal the door from him because he's out overboard. The other pshat is he figures if he lost one door in Ishkeferlach, the craftsmanship was beautiful, but if he has at least one door, they'll be able to duplicate the other door by copying it. But the second door he couldn't give up. Anyway, so either it got caught under the ship. There was probably a doorfish that swallowed the door. I've never caught a doorfish in my fishing expeditions, but there must have been a fish that eats doors. And then the Kiyasi Liyabasha, and it spit it out on the dry land. That what Shlomo said, the beams of our home of the Beis Mikdash was made out of cedar. Rehitni, Rashi says, is referring to doors, Berusim. What does Berusim mean? Pasuk Pshat it means it was a beam of wood. But we dash now took Berusim ela Beris Yam, and there's 2 Pshatim in Rashi. One is Beris Yam, it was like a pack that the ocean made with a door to rescue it. The other Pshat in Rashi is Berias Yam, it was a creation of the Yam, like a fish that swallowed the door and delivered it to the port of Akum. Lefichach, therefore, since this was such a wondrous door and it was brought with such mysterious nefesh, as they had more money, they upgraded the different doors in the Beis Hamikdash to gold. Chutz mishar nikner, which were made out of copper, they never upgraded it. Why? Since they had great nisim done with it, they didn't change it ever. They never upgraded it. It had a very clear, beautiful copper, which almost looked like gold. So that's why they never upgraded it to real gold. It was like a brass type of copper. It looked like gold, and that's why they never upgraded it. And I guess we could stop here, and now we're up to date. The Mitchell we'll learn tomorrow again at 6 a.m.
I'm not saying anything.
Shkoyach, Yossi, thank you.
Everybody. A good Tavach. Your voice should help. We should have all the Yashboyis of
Just do you know
rules with us. The